If one day the person who invited you to a strange land returned you at the train station like a defective product, how would you stand up? Clara Whitmore experienced that moment when the carriage that was supposed to pick her up disappeared along with the trust she had accumulated for half a lifetime. In the middle of the windy wasteland of the West, there was only an old trunk and a broken heart trying to stand upright. But fate is strange. It gives Clara a choice she is not prepared for: continue on the train back to a past full of loss, or step into the life of a stranger who sees value in her when the rest of the world turns its back. If it were you, what would you choose? Return to the familiar pain, or bravely step into an uncertain journey ahead? Sometimes, a moment of abandonment is the gateway to where we belong. If you want to know what happened to Clara after that moment, join me in the story. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on heart-touching stories. Dusk fell over Willow Bend in a pale yellow tinged with dusty red. The evening wind ran along the tracks, carrying the dry air of the vast West, blowing through the old awning of the small station. There was only one station in town. It had stood there for nearly 2 decades, witnessing countless people come and go, some seeking fortune, some fleeing the past. But that night, one man arrived with no one to meet him and no idea where to go. The train from the east slowed to a stop, its wheels grinding against the dry rails. The doors opened with a long creak. Clara Whitmore stepped off, holding the large trunk, which weighed nearly 70 pounds, with her right hand and her wide-brimmed hat in her left to keep it from blowing in the wind. She stood tall, the slender but sturdy figure of a woman who had lived through war and long years of suffering. At 42, Clara had a late-blooming beauty, quiet and reserved, the kind of beauty that you don't see right away. But once you do, it's hard to look away. The trip west was supposed to be a new beginning for her. A man named Bernard Crow, a prominent merchant in Willow Bend, had written to her via mail-order bride asking her to be his wife. After years of loneliness since her husband died in the Civil War, Clara bravely wrote back. She believed she was choosing a stable, if unromantic, future. Who, she believed, at her age, could hope for more. But then, as soon as the train stopped, Clara sensed something was wrong. The platform was deserted. No one was waiting. No man was holding the bouquet of flowers as the letter had said, just a strange man in a long brown coat, his hat pulled low, holding an envelope. He approached, looking Clara up and down, his eyes cold as if he were inspecting a defective product. He handed the envelope to Clara with 2 fingers, as if he didn't want to touch her for another second. "Mr. Crow sent this," he said curtly. Clara opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a return train ticket. Just a short, arrogant handwritten paragraph. "I don't think you're cut out to be a merchant's wife. You're older than I thought. I don't want to be talked about. Here's your ticket back to Pennsylvania. Go, before people start talking." No hello, no apology, not a sign of kindness, just the coldness of a man who is used to thinking of women as commodities that can be ordered and returned at will. Clara stood still. The wind gently turned the paper in her hand, but her face did not twitch, nor did she shed a tear. Years of war had taught her that tears should be saved for worthy causes. Bernard Crow was not one of them. The postman turned and walked away without a care. His footsteps mingled with the wind, and then disappeared. The platform fell into a long silence again. Clara looked around. Only a few figures were gathering supplies from the back of the train. A few horses were tied to posts, stamping their hooves on the dry ground. The old station building, with its peeling paint, was like the town itself, full of cracks from time. She took a deep breath, the smell of burning sun, dirt, and loneliness, heavy. but so real that it made her feel strangely calm. I survived the war, Clara thought. I will survive this. But no matter how strong she was, she still couldn't help but feel abandoned. The feeling of being looked down upon. The feeling that a 42-year-old woman was no longer worth anything in the eyes of others. She bent down to lift the trunk, but the old iron wheels had sunk into the ground, making it heavier than it should have been. With hands accustomed to tending to the wounded, Clara tried to lift it, but just then, a deep male voice rang out behind her. "Ma'am, let me help." Clara looked up. A tall man, about 53 years old, was standing under the shadow of a dark brown cowboy hat. His appearance was weathered. His thick coat was covered in road dust. His boots were old but sturdy. His tanned face had wrinkles not of an old man but of a man who had witnessed too much. His eyes were deep, calm, but not cold. Inside there was a quiet sadness, like the sadness of someone who had buried his whole world underground. He was Elias Boone, owner of Three Cedars Ranch about 7 miles west. He bent down and lifted the trunk like a light bag of rice. Clara paused slightly, not used to the sudden kindness. "Thank you," she said softly. Elias looked at her for a long moment, as if he were reading her whole life through her silent stance. "Is anyone picking you up?" he asked. "No," Clara answered briefly, but her voice softened. "There is no one else." A long wind blew across the platform. The signs hanging on the porch swayed, their creaking like the sigh of the town. Elias stood still for a moment. He didn't ask any more questions, didn't judge, didn't pry. His silence didn't bother Clara. It was like a thin blanket, quietly draped over a cold body. After a while, he said in a low, warm, and firm voice, "If you need a place to stay, my ranch isn't far from here. You can stay for a while, at least until you figure out what to do next." Clara tilted her head slightly, her eyes still wary. Desperation can make a person grasp at any hand that offers it. But Clara was not the type of woman to cling quickly. She had learned that true security comes only when one stands on one's own 2 feet. "You don't have to help me," Clara said softly. Elias replied immediately, without hesitation, "I don't do it because I have to. I do it because it's the right thing," a simple statement. But it struck at the deepest place in Clara's soul, the place where Bernard Crow had tried to make her believe she was unworthy of being treated kindly. No one else on the platform said another word. The sun sank behind Sageback Ridge, casting long shadows over them. Clara looked at the ticket back to Pennsylvania in her hand. A ticket with the message, "You are no longer valid." Then she looked at the heavy trunk resting on the shoulder of Elias Boone, a stranger but courteous, unexcited, undemanding, just standing there silently. She tore the ticket in half. The pieces of paper flew with the wind, blending into the red dust of the west. Clara said something that even she did not expect. "I will go with you." Elias nodded slightly, not in joy or surprise, just the nod of a man who had lived long enough to know that every choice carried an untold story. They walked out of the station together. Their shadows stretched out on the dirt road into the sunset. A man just picked up an abandoned woman's trunk, and a woman has chosen a new path with proud silence. The road to Three Cedars Ranch stretched across a sparse prairie, where the wind carried the scent of pine resin from the scattered cypress trees. Clara sat on the wooden bench in the back of the wagon, her hands clasped together. Silence fell like a thin veil, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the quiet that wind-worn souls often seek to cling to. Elias held the reins firmly, sitting upright but relaxed, as if his body had been used to this rhythm all his life. Each step of the pair of horses created a steady, gentle rhythm, helping Clara breathe easier after the shock of the train station. After a long while, Elias spoke without looking over, his voice low and calm. Clara didn't have to tell if she didn't want to, but I guess it made her sad. Clara looked up at the cold, clear sky. I'm not upset about the rejection. I'm upset that people think they have the right to treat someone like that, especially when they have no idea what made me who I am. Elias nodded slightly. They really don't know. He asked no more questions. Clara felt safer in his reticence than in a wordy consolation. She was used to people who said little but said much. Her ex-husband, Samuel, had been one. A fleeting memory made her chest ache, then dissipated into a vague, shapeless sensation. 3 Cedars Ranch appeared as the car rounded a rise. A large, lonely log house, a few small barns, a bluestone well, and a long row of fences. 3 cypress trees stood out front, their towering branches like silent sentinels. Clara looked. This place is so peaceful. Elias replied softly. Peaceful, but deserted. I'm used to this silence. Clara stepped down as Elias held the trunk for her. The wind blew across the prairie, making her hair flutter beneath the brim of her hat. Her eyes were both cautious and grateful. Are you sure you don't mind my staying here for a few days? No problem, Elias replied without thinking. This house was big enough for 2 people? It had long been too big for me. A sentence that did not carry any obvious sadness but still made Clara's heart move as if a thin string was vibrating. Elias opened the door. The smell of old wood, ash, and wild sunlight poured out. The first room had a large fireplace, a worn armchair, a long pine table with 2 china cups side by side, covered in dust from time. A few old black and white photos on the shelf made Clara stop, but she avoided looking too long. This space was like a jacket filled with memories of the man before her. I have a spare room at the back of the house. You can use it, Elias said. Thanks. I'll just stay here until I find a job or make a clearer decision for myself. Elias set the trunk down beside the guest room. He stood still for a few seconds, as if he wanted to say something and then stopped. There were some things that, if spoken too soon, could become a burden instead of a blessing. I'll go to the stables. Call if you need anything, he said before leaving. Clara watched him disappear in the sunlight pouring from the barn. She leaned against the door, feeling like this house was once filled with laughter, once with a warm fire, but now there was only emptiness. Not cold emptiness, but the kind of emptiness of someone who had died more than once. Clara opened the trunk and put a few things on the shelf. Samuel's old photo frames, a handkerchief embroidered with his initials, a few small things from her previous life. She placed them in a drawer, not showing them off but not hiding them away as if in denial, because each wound was a reminder that she had lived, loved, and lost. After packing, she went to the kitchen. It was large but sparsely stocked, as if no one had cooked a hearty meal in a long time. Clara opened the cupboard and found cornmeal, some bacon, roasted coffee, and hard bread. All it took was enough to make a simple meal for 2. She didn't know why she wanted to do it. Not out of obligation, not out of gratitude. She just believed that when 2 people shared a meal, their worlds would easily open up. As the smell of hot coffee filled the air, Elias appeared at the back door. He slowly brushed the dust off his clothes and walked into the kitchen, his eyes on the pot of water she was stirring. I don't want to bother, Elias said. Clara smiled slightly. He didn't mind. I was used to working with my hands, rather than sitting and thinking. Besides, it had been a while since I'd prepared dinner for anyone. Elias did not answer immediately. He pulled up a chair and sat down at the table, his movements hesitant, as if learning to be cared for again after years of being on his own. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee. The heat between them was a fragile but real bond. I heard people talking about you at the station, Clara said softly, which made Elias look up. They say he's been alone for a long time. A good man, but lonely. I don't believe the rumors, but I see it in his eyes. Elias swirled his coffee cup. She was perceptive. He was silent for a moment before continuing. I lost my wife 7 years ago. She'd been ill for a long time. The house has been quiet ever since. There was a long silence. Clara did not reply immediately. Her heart knew that feeling better than anyone. I lost someone I loved, too, she said after a while, but the war didn't give me the chance to be with him in his final days. Elias looked at her for a few breaths longer. She understood loss. Clara nodded. That's what made me who I am today. A gentle breeze touched the window frame, making the curtain flutter like the breath of a house just waking up. The dinner was simple, but enough for the two to share small stories. Neither of them told much, but each fragmented story combined to form a warm familiarity. Clara looked at the empty chair next to Elias, feeling that it had once belonged to someone else. Part of Clara was suddenly afraid that she was stepping into a space that was not meant for her. But Elias seemed to read it in her eyes. "There is no place in this house you are not allowed to enter," he said slowly and evenly. Clara bowed her head slightly so that her emotions wouldn't show on her face. While Clara was clearing the dishes, Elias stood up to help. The two worked together so naturally that they surprised themselves. Each movement was slow, unhurried, unforced. It was as if they had known each other for a long time without realizing it. Before leaving the kitchen, Elias turned back. "If you have trouble sleeping tonight, I'll leave the porch light on. I often stay up late reading the paper or just sitting there, listening to the world. Don't be shy." Clara replied in a small but firm voice, "I thank Elias for his kindness." Elias inclined his head in reply, then walked out onto the porch. The yellow light from the oil lamp fell onto the steps, dissolving in the air filled with the scent of pine and the night breeze. Clara stood inside the house, looking out, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. She did not know what was unfolding, or what path awaited her, but for the first time in years, Clara did not feel like she was sinking. She felt like she was standing on solid ground, where someone was holding the wheel of her life, firmly but wordlessly. Her heart began to hear the long, silent beat, a slow beat, a peaceful beat, a beat that she didn't know where it would lead, but this time, she no longer felt alone. A thin mist hung over Three Cedars Ranch when Clara stepped out onto the porch. The air carried a slight chill through her sweater. She had slept fitfully the night before, not because of anxiety, but because the newness of things had made her mind more active than usual. The distant sounds of insects, the creaking of wood in the night, and the porch light Elias had left on made Clara feel like she wasn't entirely lost. The wooden house at that moment seemed to retain the warm breath of a house that had once been used to hearing people. Clara reached out to touch the railing, the smooth wood on the outside edge showing that someone often stood there for a long time. Maybe Elias on the nights when he couldn't find sleep. His silence was not avoidance, but the silence of someone who had lost someone and had to learn to stand still in the face of pain so that it wouldn't overwhelm him. Clara went into the kitchen to prepare coffee. The steam spread slowly, touching the empty air. While waiting for the water to boil, Clara looked out the wide window. 3 cypress trees stood tall, their branches reaching high, like 3 steadfast pillars in a challenging land. A short while later, Elias's heavy but deliberate footsteps sounded on the porch. He entered the kitchen, his hat still covered in dew, his boots covered in dust. His eyes met Clara's for a moment. "She can't sleep." "I slept, but not as long as I would have liked." Clara set out another porcelain cup. "My body was not used to this new land, but the air here felt easier than anywhere else I had been." Elias poured coffee into his cup. He felt like he wanted to say something more but held back. Clara sat down across from him, and they drank their coffee in silence. This silence was different from the silence at the train station, where she felt abandoned. The silence in the kitchen made Clara's heart calm down, as if life was giving her a moment to breathe after such a long journey. Clara put down her glass. "Elias, your house is so big. It must be hard for you to be alone." He glanced down at his coffee. "I was used to it. Or maybe I had convinced myself so it wouldn't be so hard." Clara felt a thin thread of understanding connect them. Two people who had their own darkness, but had both learned to embrace it without letting it overwhelm their light. Elias stood up, preparing to go to the stables. "I'll check the west fence. With the sun high in the sky, the ground there is prone to cracking." He stopped near the door. If Clara wanted to look around the ranch, she could go ahead. No one here would bother her. Clara nodded slightly. "I want to get used to this place." While Elias was out, Clara tidied up the kitchen and walked to the back of the house. The old vegetable garden sat beside the bluestone well. Someone had clearly worked hard at cultivating it, but now weeds had crept into every corner. Clara bent down and touched the soil. The surface was dry, but there was still a slight moisture underneath. With skillful hands and patience, this garden could come back to life. A strange feeling crept into her heart. Clara had thought she would only be here for a few days at most, but this ranch felt like something worth stopping for, if only to catch her breath. A voice from behind made Clara turn around. She was the one Elias had picked up from Willow Bend. A woman in her late 50s with her hair tied back and sharp, friendly eyes stood near the fence. She leaned against a wagon loaded with milk crates. "My name is Martha Wynne. I live on the east side, and I bring milk over here every week for Elias." Clara smiled slightly. "Nice to meet you." Martha looked at Clara more closely. She didn't look like someone who had come west to run away from trouble. She looked like someone who had come to start something new. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "I wasn't sure what to start with." Martha tilted her head. She was standing in the middle of a large ranch, next to a nice man, with a clean bed and hot coffee every day. Whether or not to start was up to her heart. That statement touched a depth Clara had not yet let anyone see. But she said nothing more. Martha understood that, and did not ask further. Elias approached from a distance, leaning his hoe against the log of the barn. "Hello, Mrs. Wynne. Was the journey from your house difficult today?" Martha laughed. "It was a little harder because the Lincolns were strutting down the road, but I got there. I also came to see if Elias needed any extra help this season." Her eyes swept over Clara as if she knew there was a double meaning to that statement. "Elias paid me right, but I think he needs a second pair of hands in the house." Martha continued. Clara felt her face heat up a little. Elias pursed his lips, his eyes lingering on Clara for a few more seconds. "I'll look after the ranch," Elias said. "But thank you for your concern." Martha turned to Clara. "Would she stay long? I don't know yet," Clara replied softly. "But this place seems to make me think about it more than I intended." Martha's eyes flashed with a knowing. Sometimes God sends you to a place not to find someone else, but to find yourself. Think about it. After Martha left, Clara and Elias took turns sorting through the milk carton she had brought. The atmosphere between them was strange, yet familiar, like the first steps of two people learning to walk together. Clara asked Elias, "I think the garden can be saved. If you don't mind, I'd like to try to take care of it," Elias replied almost immediately. "Clara, do whatever you want at this ranch. I don't consider you a guest. This place is big enough for two people to find what they're looking for." That sentence made Clara's heart skip a beat, but it was enough for her to realize that her life was turning a new page. Clara tied her hair back and began weeding the garden. Each pull, each uprooted blade of grass brought back the feeling she had had years ago. The feeling of tilling the soil, of nurturing something that might grow, a small beginning, but real. Elias stood near the stables, occasionally looking up at Clara. He didn't speak, just watched, as if Clara crouching in the middle of the garden made the ranch feel less empty. Hours passed like that. 2 Cedars Ranch seemed to come alive with Clara's movements. Though she didn't know it, those movements also revived something inside Elias, the feeling of having someone to share a home with, even if it was only in small ways. Before the sun set, Clara stopped. She stood and looked back at the clearing. Elias approached, his boots making a deep sound on the ground. "Good job," Clara replied softly. "I just want this place to breathe again." Elias looked at her a moment longer. Maybe he wasn't the only one breathing again at the ranch. The simple statement was enough to make Clara pause. It wasn't because of the flirting. Elias wasn't the type of man to talk about things he didn't understand. It was the sincerity in his voice that made Clara's chest tighten. For a second, she saw herself reflected in his eyes, a tired woman who never stopped trying to get up. The afternoon light slanted down, casting a thin layer of gold on the fence and her hair. In that moment, they both found themselves at the intersection of 2 paths that neither of them expected would cross. The path of loss, and the path of things that can still start again. Elias spoke softly. If Clara needed shelter longer than expected, I wouldn't object. Clara took a deep breath, her heart pounding at a question that troubled her. I don't want to be a burden. Elias shook his head, slowly but firmly. People are only a burden when they don't want to live. Clara was alive, and making this place alive. Clara did not answer, but something inside her blossomed like a stubborn wildflower bursting from the rocky ground. An old emotion, long dormant, stirred. Clara stepped inside, her hand lightly touching the wooden door. She realized 3 Cedars Ranch smelled like home, not because she belonged there, but because it was opening up to her slowly and sincerely. That evening, with the porch light still on and the wind coming through the cracks in the door whispering like the whisper of the mountains, Clara lay in the guest room. She thought about the journey she had made, about the pain that had drained her. But for the first time in years, Clara was no longer lost in the darkness of memory. She heard Elias's footsteps on the porch, steady, heavy, but calm. Something about it made her feel like her heart still had the strength to beat. Clara closed her eyes and knew she had turned onto a path she had not dared to take since Samuel's death, a path she did not know where it would lead, but no longer feared. 3 cypress trees out there stand tall in the night like 3 silent witnesses to a new beginning. A soft sunlight washed over the vast expanse of land where 3 Cedars Ranch sat amid the vast prairie. Clara stood before her reviving garden, rubbing her hands together to loosen the remaining soil. The cleared beds now revealed streaks of dark brown. They were like her heart after a storm. Old, tired, but still capable of growing something new if cared for. Elias approached with a bucket of water. He set it down and looked around the garden. The beds were brighter than they had been in years. Clara bowed her head slightly. I just tried to leave it as it was. I get the feeling someone planted this place with a lot of love. Elias was silent for a moment before answering. She used to grow everything here, from vegetables to cut flowers. She said this place looked best when there was color. His voice did not tremble, but it was so deep that Clara felt the gravel shift in her heart. It was not the lingering pain, but the honesty of a man who lived on despite the old memories. Clara took the watering can and gently touched the soil. If you don't mind, I can help her tend this corner. Elias looked at her long enough for his answer to carry more than a nod. I don't mind. This place needs patient hands. There was no overly romantic spark between them. There was only the understanding of two adults who understood that the most lasting things always started small and with perseverance. Clara adjusted her shawl and continued weeding the fence. The sound of the grass coming up from the ground was as soft as the ranch's breathing. The wind blowing through the cypress trees near the gate made a sound like the deep murmur of an old man telling a story. As Clara focused on her work, the sound of horse hooves echoed from the dirt road ahead. A small carriage pulled up a cloud of red dust. In it sat a man in a tailored suit, carrying a soft leather whip. His immaculate attire against the wild landscape made his face stand out as if he didn't belong here. The car stopped at the fence. Elias stood still, his shoulders tensed, not with fear but with caution. The man in the car got out, adjusted his collar, and looked at the ranch with a look that didn't hide his competitive spirit. "I presume you are Elias Boone. I am Warren Hale, proprietor of the hardware store at Willow Bend. I have come in connection with the woman you are caring for." For a moment, Clara stood still holding the watering can. She had no idea what the man meant, but his presence made the atmosphere suddenly heavier. Elias approached the fence, his voice low but clear. "Get to the point." Warren stared at Clara, his eyes full of confidence. "I've come to take Mrs. Whitmore back to town. She's a mail-order bride for Bernard Crow, my longtime business partner. Bernard says she left the station with a man he doesn't know. The whole town's talking." Clara held the watering can close to her body, her chest heaving with emotions she couldn't name. She had thought she had escaped the feeling of being treated like a commodity, but these words clearly reminded her that society still saw women as possessions. Elias replied slowly, "Mrs. Whitmore belonged to no one in town." She decided where to go. Warren let out a thin laugh. "Elias, you know what they say about her in town. Dropped off at the train station. Run off with a widower. They live together. What kind of job can she get with such a reputation with just a few words?" Clara felt the years of rebuilding her dignity crumble again. Part of her wanted to turn away to avoid hearing another harsh word, but the other part of her was frozen. She had survived war and the loss of her husband. She could not allow herself to be hurt by a stranger. Clara walked to the fence and stood next to Elias. "I don't live here because I want shelter. I live because Elias offers me a place that doesn't ask about my past, and I don't think I need his judgment." Warren hesitated slightly at Clara's calmness, but he did not back down. "I was just helping you avoid scandal. A woman alone. People talking would not be pleasant." Clara looked straight at him, her eyes shining with the strength she thought she had lost. "I have endured bullets near my ears, saving lives in war. I have heard the doctor tell me my husband died far away and no one could retrieve his body. I have lived through it all without breaking. Do you think a few words will shake me? Mr. Hale." The air seemed to stop for a beat. Warren paled, not knowing whether to retreat or say more. Elias stood beside Clara, his presence like a solid wall. His visit was enough. Clara would stay here as long as she wanted. Warren narrowed his eyes. "You're doing something bad to your reputation. Elias." Elias answered immediately, his voice even but containing a hidden force that made Warren's hands tremble slightly. "Reputation is not as important as treating people who need kindness with kindness." Warren got into the car, his face etched with frustration. As he drove away, a thin layer of dust rose up in his wake, as if his presence had left only a sour taste in the air. Clara gripped the fence to steady her breathing. "I'm sorry. Elias. That bothered you." Elias stepped closer, his voice lower, firmer, calmer than before. "Clara, I don't mind. There's nothing to apologize for. People like Hale like to talk about fame because they don't understand that kindness is what holds people together." Clara bowed her head slightly. I thought I had gotten over my feeling of being looked down upon, but it all came back with just a few words. Elias placed her hand on the railing near hers. The feeling did not define her, and it would not stay with her for long. Here, she was allowed to be herself. Clara took a deep breath, as if to clear away the heavy memories Warren had brought up. I was just afraid of dragging him into something unrelated. Elias looked straight at her. Clara. Her presence wasn't something I wanted to avoid. She made the ranch brighter than before. I don't know how long it had been since I felt that. The words were so soft and true that they made Clara stand still. The wind touched her hair, blowing across that fragile yet profound moment. Clara spoke after a while, her voice quieter but firmer than before. I don't know how long I'll be here. I haven't decided anything yet. But here, I feel like I don't have to fight every day anymore. Elias replied very quietly, "No one should have to fight alone." Those words, to Clara, weren't a promise. They were like a gentle touch to a healing wound, making her feel both pain and warmth. They stood like that for a while before Clara turned back to the garden and continued watering the newly dug beds. Her hands shook slightly, but her heart felt calmer. Each drop of water that fell to the ground was an affirmation that she could still begin, even at an age where many people think there is nothing left to begin. Elias watched, his eyes filled with something he dared not say aloud. He knew that the bond between them was not love. It was a slow trust, a silent sharing. And in the world of those who had lost, that was more precious than a premature confession. As the sunlight fell on the eaves, Clara sat on the steps. She touched her calloused hands, but something soft like silk appeared in her heart. For the first time in years, she wasn't just trying to live, she was starting to want to live again. The days at Three Cedars Ranch took on a new rhythm for Clara. No rush, no pressure, no echoes of judgment from the town. Just the sound of the wind rustling through the wooden fences, the sound of horseshoes in the dry air, and Elias's calm presence as he walked from the barn into the house. All of it contributed to a soft harmony Clara had long forgotten. Clara was feeding the chickens that day when a boy appeared in the doorway of the barn. His eyes were wary, his arms close to his body. He was about 14, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes that made him seem older than he was. Clara recognized him immediately. Elias had mentioned Caleb Boone, his nephew. Caleb stood still, watching Clara and the chickens hopping around her boots. "My name is Caleb, Mrs. Whitmore. I live in the little house behind the barn. Uncle Elias said I could come say hello if I wanted." Caleb's voice was low, but not shaky. Clara sensed he was trying to sound more steadfast than he let on. Clara smiled softly. "You can call me Clara, if that makes you comfortable." Caleb nodded, his eyes widening. "I heard you were a nurse. Is that true?" Clara packed her bags of food and nodded. "Yes. A nurse in the war." Caleb thought for a few seconds. Was that why she knew how to talk without being afraid? The question made Clara pause. Not because he was wrong, but because it was so unexpectedly right. She didn't answer right away. She sat down next to Caleb, placing her hand on the head of a rooster flapping its wings. "When people are hurting," Clara said slowly, "intuition finds a way to help them feel less alone. That's what I did many years ago, and perhaps I still do now." Caleb looked down. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear the fire. Clara understood. Children who had lost a parent carried images they did not want to remember. She asked no more questions, just sat beside him, letting the silence of closeness do its thing. After a moment, Caleb turned to look at her. Uncle Elias said the ranch could be a healing place for anyone, adult or child. Clara smiled slightly. Uncle Elias was right. Elias appeared nearby, placing the hay bale on the ground. He did not interrupt their conversation. He simply watched the two with a quiet but satisfied gaze, as if the sight reminded him of something he had not seen in a long time. A house with normal conversation. Soon they were done cleaning the chicken coop together. Caleb was smiling more, albeit half smiles. Clara could see his heart opening little by little. Slowly. Slowly. But truly. As Caleb walked toward the small house behind the barn, Clara and Elias stopped to watch. She twirled the handkerchief in her hand. "The boy has too many invisible wounds," Clara said. "But I believe he has a strength he cannot see." Elias put a hand on the pillar. "Caleb was like me in that way. We survived, but the hardest part was learning to live." Clara didn't turn around, but she listened to every word in that sentence. The man's voice had the slowness of someone who had experienced situations that left people changed forever. Clara replied in a serious but sympathetic tone. "You did better than you thought." Elias, a boy being able to smile after so much loss, is not something that comes naturally. It is because the adults around him know how to give him a safe place. Elias bowed his head slightly. "I only did what I could." Clara tilted her head at him. "Sometimes the possible is what is needed most." Elias's eyes met hers in a silence long enough for Clara to sense something growing between them, though neither of them had yet spoken it aloud. The afternoon sun shone on Elias's shoulders, highlighting the wrinkles around his eyes. They were not signs of aging, but of a soul that had endured too much and was still strong enough to stand tall. Clara knew she was feeling something she had tried to avoid for years. The warmth in Elias's voice softened her heart in a way she hadn't expected. It scared her. But it also made her curious. Scared because she had lost. Curious because she knew that not everyone could soften hearts with a few simple gestures. Clara spent the rest of the day tidying up the kitchen. She made a few simple dishes. The smell of yellow cornbread wafted through the air, mixed with the smell of roasted coffee, making the wooden house seem more familiar. When Elias entered, he paused. This atmosphere. "Clara, long time no see." Clara put the napkin on the table. I just rearranged it a bit to make it easier for him to use. Elias looked around the kitchen, his eyes strange, as if seeing his house in a new light for the first time. A house changes when someone knows how to breathe warmth into it. Clara tapped the edge of the table lightly. "I wasn't trying to do anything. I just wanted to use my hands." They were more used to working than sitting still. Elias moved closer. Did she ever think she deserved a place to call home? The question stopped Clara, not because she didn't have an answer, but because it hit the nail on the head. She'd had a home, then lost it. She'd been a wife, then a widow. She'd hoped. Then those hopes were crushed by Bernard Crow's words on the Willow Bend train station. She answered slowly. "I wasn't sure I could call any place home anymore." Elias looked at her closely, as if trying to read the meaning behind her calm demeanor. If a place made her breathe easier, sleep more peacefully, and feel like she didn't have to bear everything alone, then that was home, even if she didn't call it that. Clara felt her chest tighten. She didn't know how to respond, not because she didn't believe it, but because the words were too close to the truth she had been avoiding. At that moment, the barn door swung open. Caleb stepped in, his face pale but his eyes bright. "Clara, Uncle Elias, I want to show you something." Caleb held out a half-carved piece of wood. It had a little cypress on it. "I carved it when I couldn't sleep. I thought, I wanted to make it for Clara, because she makes me feel at peace." Clara reached out to take it. She was speechless for a moment. A boy who had lost his parents, haunted by the memory of fire, had just handed her something carved with his trembling but sincere hands. Elias leaned against the stove, his eyes softening. "Caleb, you did well." Clara held the piece of wood to her chest as if it were something very precious. "Thank you. Caleb, I value it more than you know." Caleb looked at Clara, his eyes opening a little more, like a forgotten door being slightly opened. When he left, Clara and Elias stood still. They didn't say anything more, but the silence between them was different. It was thicker, warmer, as if their shared breathing had begun to synchronize. Clara wondered what was going on inside her. She wanted to believe it was just gratitude for the people on the ranch, but deep down, her heart knew better something was forming, not a flash of love, but a slow flow of water through her parched earth. It was weak but steady. Elias looked at her one more time before stepping out onto the porch. If Clara ever decides to go her own way, I hope this ranch is a part of that decision. Clara stood there, still holding the cypress carving. She heard the wind blowing through the eaves, a reminder that some things in life come when you least expect them. Inside Clara, it was growing, small, slow, but real. 3 days after Caleb delivered Clara's wood carving, the weather in the area turned strange. Thick clouds moved quickly over Sageback Ridge, swallowing the light until the prairie was a heavy gray, a premonition of the unexpected. Clara was drying some herbs on the porch when Sheriff Tom Carver rode into the ranch yard. The horse stopped, breathing heavily. Sheriff dismounted with a look on his face that Clara could tell was serious. Elias came out of the barn. "What's the matter?" "Tom." The sheriff lowered his voice to a barely audible whisper. The Dry Creek marauders were near Willow Bend again. They stopped a wagon and took its contents. Someone was beaten. I want you to be careful because this ranch is on their usual route. Elias did not flinch. He was used to this kind of danger in the clearing. His eyes, however, glanced briefly toward the door where Clara was standing. "Thank you for the warning. I will prepare." The sheriff glanced at Clara, his concern evident. If there were women and children present, he would have to be even more careful. Clara replied for Elias. "We will be careful. Thank you, Mr. Carver." The sheriff nodded and left. As the sound of hooves faded, the air became thick. Elias stepped onto the porch. "Clara, everything's fine. Those people cause trouble, but mostly just take advantage of the town's vulnerability. They don't come to the ranch often." Clara didn't shake. She looked straight at Elias, as if his attempt to reassure her made her feel even stronger. "I understood. I just hoped they wouldn't come for Caleb. He had enough to fear." Elias put his hand on the porch post, his face darkening at the mention of Caleb's name. "I will protect this ranch. You don't have to worry." His voice had a certainty like the compacted earth beneath her feet, making Clara feel like she was standing with a man who was not easily swayed. But predictions cannot prevent what is coming. Later that day, Clara was tidying up the garden when she heard a faint, distant bang, like wood clanking. Elias was in the back pasture checking the fence. Caleb was told to stay inside, but he ran toward the barn when he heard the noise. Caleb's voice called out, "Uncle Elias, can you hear me?" Clara turned immediately. A chill ran down her spine. She set down the basket and hurried toward Caleb's voice. It was so quiet that her footsteps could be heard as clearly as her heartbeat. Caleb stood in front of the barn door, his eyes wide. "Clara, there's someone in the woods. I hear voices." Clara pulled Caleb close. "Come inside now. Don't go any further." Caleb shook his head. "I'm afraid to leave you here alone." Just as Clara was about to continue, a thin stream of smoke appeared from the direction of the stables. The smell of burning spread on the wind. The smoke quickly thickened while the sound of horses neighing in panic rang out. Clara gripped Caleb's arm, her heart pounding. "Stay back. Don't go near the barn." The sound of running footsteps in the distance made them turn. Elias appeared from the grasslands, running and calling. "Clara. Caleb. Stay back." Clara knew what was happening. She didn't need to look too hard to know it was man-made and not accidental. The flames had started in the stables, spreading through the dry straw. A plume of black smoke billowed into the already dark sky. Elias rushed into the stables to bring out the horses. Clara held Caleb at a distance. The boy was shaking but trying to keep his composure. From behind the warehouse, two strange figures emerged. They wore balaclavas that hid half their faces. One held a pistol, the other a knife. Both looked at Clara and Caleb as if they had seen an opportunity. The gunman spoke hoarsely. "Find the boy. He'll be worth some trade." Caleb clung to Clara, his face pale. Clara took a step forward, blocking the boy. Without thinking, she placed herself as a human barrier. The two men did not expect a woman to stand in front of them. The man with the knife spoke harshly. "What are you doing? Move aside." Clara didn't move. Her voice was cold in a way that even she didn't expect. "The boy isn't going anywhere with you." The gunman took another step forward. "You think you can stop me?" Clara looked him straight in the eye. "I've saved people from gunfire a few feet away. I don't back down." At that moment, the wind seemed to stop. The gunman was taken aback by Clara's inhuman calm, but he quickly growled. She resisted in vain. Clara spoke softly, but each word was sharp. "I do not live to be bartered to you, and neither does Caleb." Meanwhile, Elias rushed out of the stable. He saw what was happening and did not hesitate. Elias ran straight at the man with the knife and struck him with a decisive blow. He fell, groaning, the knife flying. The gunman turned, but Elias lunged at him, sending both men rolling to the ground. Clara pulled Caleb away. "Run home now. Close the door. Don't open it for anyone but me and Uncle Elias." Caleb ran with a speed Clara had never seen him. He disappeared through the doorway. The gunman struggled to his feet, but Elias blocked him. In the struggle, the gunman swung the butt of the gun at Elias's head. Elias fell to his knees, his arms clawing at the ground. Clara didn't think twice. She picked up the piece of wood near her feet, rushed behind the intruder, and hit him hard in the shoulder. He staggered, turned to swing the gun, but Elias grabbed his wrist and twisted it. The gun clattered to the ground. The other man got up and ran towards the small forest. He signaled to his comrade who was being held by Elias. "Let's retreat." The two men disappeared into the shadows of the trees. A moment later, only the sound of the wind rustling the dry branches was heard. Clara ran to Elias. "Are you okay?" Elias placed his hand on the wound on his temple, blood flowing in a thin line. It stung a little. No big deal. He said so, but his breathing was heavier than usual. Clara helped him to his feet. The wound was not deep, but it was making him dizzy. She held his shoulder, her eyes determined. "I need to get you inside right away." Elias nodded slightly. "Where is Caleb?" Clara replied softly. "I went inside and locked the door. It's okay." Relief flashed across Elias's face, blurred by the blood. Clara helped him into the kitchen. His hair was disheveled, his face darkened by the smoke. But that moment showed Clara the true nature of the man standing beside her. No hesitation in danger, no thought of personal injury before knowing the safety of others. Clara sat Elias down on a chair. She brought water, clean towels, and a bandage kit. The kitchen light was dim, reflecting Elias's tanned skin and the red blood. Clara used a warm towel to clean around the wound, her hands as deft and calm as when she was a nurse. Elias looked at her, his eyes softening with a rare tenderness. "Clara, You shouldn't take such risks. He has a gun. Clara looked up, her voice low but firm. I couldn't stand to see them take Caleb. I had no children of my own, but I knew how to protect a child shaken by the past. Elias studied her face, as if he found something he had lost in it for so long. I thought I was used to being alone, but when I saw her standing in front of Caleb, I knew the ranch had changed because she was here. Clara stopped, not out of surprise, but because her heart touched a point that was both painful and still. I'm not as strong as you think. Elias. Elias placed his large hand on hers, as light as a leaf. She was strong in a way that was not immediately obvious. I knew what I was saying. Clara wanted to laugh, but she couldn't. Emotions welled up inside her, and she just looked at him with a troubled look. I was afraid of this feeling, afraid that one day it would hurt me like before. Elias squeezed her hand gently. That feeling only meant that she was alive. The living still had to fear, but they could also find what they thought they had lost. Clara stood still. Elias's words were not words of comfort. They were more like the truth spoken from a heart that had been broken and then pieced back together with its own hands. A breeze blew in from the kitchen door, making the oil lamp flicker. Caleb ran over and hugged Clara's arm. I'm okay. Are you hurt? Clara hugged his head, relieved to see him okay. It's okay. She's okay. Elias looked at the two of them, his eyes filled with something warm and indescribable. At that moment, Clara deeply felt that a new bond had formed between the three of them. Not a bond, but a slow, silent bond. Outside. The late afternoon light caught the 3 cypress trees in front of the ranch. They stood straight in the wind, a symbol of the endurance life had taught them. In that moment, Clara understood. From the moment she picked up the log to protect Caleb and the moment Elias rushed forward despite the danger, there was no longer gratitude or chance between them. It's a shared survival, one that could pave the way for love if they dare to move forward. A thin layer of mist hung over the land around Sagebrush Hollow, covering the ranch in a soft, gray blanket. After the surprise attack by the Dry Creek marauders, the atmosphere here seemed to have grown a beat quieter, but not the quiet of fear. It was like the silence after a strong wind, as people looked around to see what was still standing. Clara spent more time around the house, both to keep the ranch tidy and to keep Elias from worrying if she went too far. But she also found herself not liking being away from the ranch for too long, though she had never thought of it as an anchor. Now, every door, every step felt strangely familiar. Caleb clung to Clara more, not out of fear, but out of the sense of security he found in her. But what bothered Clara was the look in his eyes every time she recalled the attack. There was something so similar to the look in the eyes of the son she had lost, a fear so closed it was hard to reach. Clara didn't want the shadow of the past hanging over Caleb. She knew all too well it would ruin the child in the same way it had ruined her. One afternoon, Caleb sat on the wooden steps, fingering the wood carving Elias had given him. He looked down at the vast expanse of land in front of the ranch as if searching for some answer that was slipping through his mind. Clara came over and sat next to him. What are you thinking about? Caleb. The boy touched his finger to the carving in the wood, his voice low but clear. I think about Uncle Elias. I'm afraid he got hurt badly that day. I think I caused trouble. Clara put her hand on his shoulder. You're not causing trouble. Adults do their jobs to keep you safe. That's the good side of the world. You don't need to feel guilty. Caleb didn't look at her. I saw them burn the barn. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I guess I was a coward. Clara turned to the boy. Sometimes standing still was the only thing to do, not out of cowardice, but out of survival. She was only a child. But she had run and locked the door to keep herself safe. She had done what had to be done. Caleb looked up. Was Clara scared? The question made Clara silent for a moment. Yes. She was so scared her heart almost stopped. But being scared doesn't mean you're not strong. Fear is sometimes what keeps you sane. Caleb nodded slightly. Clara realized it was working, at least as a first step in pulling the boy out of his trance. The sound of hooves echoed from the gate. Elias was returning from town. The smell of road dust coated his clothes. He stopped his horse in front of the porch and looked at Clara and Caleb with relief. Sheriff Carver sends his regards. He says the marauders are deep south. They may cause more trouble, but they won't be back in the area for now. Clara smiled. That was good news. Elias stepped onto the porch. Clara, I have something to tell you. His voice was low, different than usual. Clara sensed the gravity in his words. She looked at Caleb. Caleb, would you help me carry the bales of hay into the barn? The boy understood, stood up, and walked towards the cage. As Caleb's figure faded, Elias pulled up a wooden chair and sat down next to Clara. The distance between them was only an arm's length, but the silence that stretched on made Clara feel that what she was about to say was not simple. Elias looked at his calloused hands, as if they were a window to parts of himself he kept hidden. Clara, you saw them. You saw what happened the other day. But there's something I didn't tell you. Something about the marauders not being at this ranch by accident. Clara took a deep breath. Go ahead. Elias looked up. His ashen eyes were filled with doubt and self-reproach. My brother had joined them 3 years ago. Not because he wanted to, but because of gambling. He owed them so much that he had no way out. I tried to pull him out, but it was too late. He died on the run. I buried him behind the 3 pines, next to the old oak. Clara felt a tightness in her chest, not fear, but a painful understanding of the weight. And they thought he owed something for it. Elias nodded. Yes, they wanted me to give them some of the pasture land up north. The one with water all year round, I wouldn't let them. So they tried to pressure me. Maybe they were just planning to burn the barn that day as a warning. I didn't expect to see you and Caleb, Clara said in a low voice. You should have told me sooner. Elias bowed his head. I know, but I don't want to drag you into this. You've been through too much. I want you to feel safe at the ranch, even though the truth is I haven't been able to keep everything from falling apart. Clara shook Elias's hand gently. Elias, no one in the West stays out of trouble. Trying to protect people doesn't make you unsafe. It just makes you a good person. And telling the truth makes me feel more like I belong here, not less. Elias looked at her a long time. She wasn't afraid. Wasn't afraid that this ranch would be targeted again. Clara squinted, the wind blowing through her hair. I've stood by hospital beds knowing that someone I loved could leave at any moment. I've walked past places I've lived in for years without feeling anything. I've learned that it's not fear that holds me back or pushes me away. What keeps me here is the fact that I feel useful, and I feel that every day. Elias sat up straight, his eyes full of emotion but restrained. He was usually quiet about his feelings, but this time he let them escape like breath. You make this place alive, Clara. Not just for me, but for Caleb. Every day you're here, the ranch has a peace I couldn't create on my own. I know I shouldn't say it, but I think I've placed too much hope in your presence. Clara shook her head slightly. I hope it's not a sin, but don't put it on me as a responsibility. I can't bear another loss. The sentence made Elias freeze. She thought I would let her bear something. Clara looked out at the open space, where the last rays of light were falling on the grass. I thought, if I let myself be moved again, I fear I will lose everything again. I am not sure I can bear it. Elias looked at her for a long time, then spoke in a voice as soft as a horse's breathing after a long journey. No one can promise that they can't lose the one they love, but I know I won't abandon you. And if anything happens to me, at least you'll know that you brought the best things to a man who thought he had nothing left." Clara felt her eyes heat up, but she kept her composure. "You shouldn't say that. It makes me feel so important." Elias smiled, soft but genuine, because she mattered, whether she wanted it to or not. The room was silent. The wind carried the scent of sweet grass near the porch. They did not speak for a long time, but the air was no longer heavy. It was like two lands after a storm, lying side by side, realizing they could be reunited. Caleb ran out of the barn, holding a glass of water and giving it to Elias. "Uncle, does your face still hurt?" Elias took it and patted the boy's head. "It doesn't hurt anymore. Don't worry." Caleb raised his head, his eyes full of trust for both adults. He wanted everyone here forever. He wanted this ranch to never lose anyone again. Clara hugged him. "You haven't lost anyone. We're still here." Elias watched, his throat constricted by something he could not name. Perhaps this was family in its gentlest, slowest form. No one said so. They just sat there, letting the truth find its place. At the end of the day, Clara walked out into the yard and looked at the 3 cypress trees standing in a row in front of the house. They were tall and straight and quiet against the pale sky like a thin blanket. She realized that they were strong not because they were tough, but because they knew how to stand together in the wind. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I can stand again, if I'm not alone." The last rays of sunlight slanted down around 3 Cedars Ranch, creating soft, golden streaks that hugged the old wooden fence. Everything was quiet in a way that made it easy to hear one's own breathing. Clara stood on the porch, her hand lightly touching the time-darkened wooden post. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and horsehair, making her feel like she was part of the land, not a stranger. After the recent events, the ranch still had a burn mark on the little north barn, but thankfully no one had been hurt more seriously. Sheriff Carver came by more often, checking on the situation and saying the area was quiet. That made Clara feel better, not because she was afraid of an attack, but because she knew Caleb and Elias needed that peace to heal the deep parts of their hearts. Caleb ran around the yard with his new brown dog from the neighbor's house. He named it Pepper because its tail wagged so fast it looked like a peppercorn dancing in the distance. His bright laugh rang through the warm air, making Clara stop and look back. It was a sound she thought she would never hear again in a home of her own. Elias stepped out of the stables, his boots clicking loudly on the ground. He wiped his hands on the towel draped over his shoulder and stopped beside Clara. They both watched Caleb and Pepper play. Neither said anything, but the silence felt like a warm blanket draped over each other's shoulders. Elias was the one to break the silence, his voice deep, slow, and tinged with a rare confusion. "Clara, there's something I want to show you." He gestured to follow him. Clara closed the door and walked beside Elias to the small garden behind the house. The land, once desolate, was now proudly green. Clumps of pale purple wildflowers intermingled with the green grass, creating a simple yet elegant beauty. Elias stopped in front of a pine fenced-off clearing. On the fence post was a sign that smelled of new wood. On the inside was carved with a knife Garden of Sarah. Clara's hand trembled slightly. When did he do that? Elias looked down, as if he didn't want her to see the emotion in his eyes. "I started that night when Caleb couldn't sleep. She told me about her daughter. I thought, if she wanted, this could be a place to remember Sarah, but not with sadness. With life." Clara touched the inscription. Her fingers moved over each engraving, feeling a pulse of memory. She looked at the garden, then at Elias. "Thank you. This is something I never thought I would have. A place named after her. in a home where I wouldn't be considered unlucky. Elias replied in a voice as deep as the breath of the earth. No one at this ranch is unlucky. Clara, you and your memories have a place here. Clara looked up, her eyes misty, but not from weakness. It was the relief of someone who had been broken for so long and finally found a place to rest her burden. Caleb ran over, Pepper following. He looked at the board, his mouth open. What a beautiful name. Clara. Is that your daughter's name? Clara nodded. Yes. Her name was Sarah. Caleb was silent for a few seconds before speaking. She wondered what color flowers her daughter would like. Clara smiled and hugged him gently. She liked purple, like those wildflowers. Caleb cried out and ran off to pick flowers. Clara watched him, feeling her heart open up a little more without fear. Unexpectedly, the pain that had once locked her up was now opened gently by the hands of a child, as if caressing her. As Caleb left, Elias took a deep breath and looked at Clara with rare hesitation. I had more to say, but I didn't know if it was the right time. Clara stood still. Speak. Elias, I will listen. He put his hand on the fence post. I thought a lot about what you said, about the pain you carry, and I knew that if someone rushed into your life, it would hurt you more. I didn't want to do that, but I also didn't want to keep quiet so you thought I couldn't face it. Clara looked at him, listening to his every breath. I'm not good at talking about love, Elias said, his voice slow and deep like earth that's been baking all day. But I know this. If there's any woman I want to wake up next to every day of my life, it's you. Clara felt her heart regain its lost rhythm. She stood there for a long time before speaking, but Elias did not urge her. Elias, I don't know if I can love again. The fear is so great, I'm afraid of losing again. I'm afraid I won't have the strength to get back up if that happens. Elias stepped closer, slowly. Clara, love is not about promising not to hurt anymore. Love is about choosing someone to stand with in pain, in joy, in the unpredictable. I am not asking you to promise anything, not asking you to rush into a big decision. I just want you to know that I am here, and I will still be here if you need a place to lean on. Clara inhaled, a long, deep breath that seemed to pull up layers of heavy memories. And if I said I was willing to try, just try. Elias touched her hand lightly. It was the first time he had taken the initiative. I would consider it the most precious gift I had ever received. They stood very close together, close enough that she could hear his easy breathing, neither rushed nor strained. Close enough that she realized that what made her feel safe was not that Elias was strong, but that he knew how to keep quiet at the right times. The silence between them was no longer an empty space. It was a gentle promise, free of obligation. Caleb returned with a bouquet of purple flowers. Clara, I picked these for you. Clara took it, smiling genuinely. Thank you. Caleb, these are the most beautiful flowers I've ever received. Elias looked at the scene, and the smile in his eyes was unmistakable. Clara, at this ranch, you are not alone. Never. That sentence was like a thread tied lightly to her heart, not pulling, just there to remind her that life is sometimes not as cruel as she thought. The afternoon light faded behind the cypress trees. Pepper barked happily, Caleb laughed loudly, and Elias stood beside Clara in complete peace. No one spoke of the future. No one promised great things. But in that moment, Clara knew she had found what she thought was lost forever. A place to breathe. A home. A man who carried his own pain but was willing to share it with her. A boy who had never called anyone family, but now looked at her with absolute trust. All of this made for something Clara never dared to dream of. A new life that came not by magic, but by slow, quiet, and honest steps. In that sunset, when the wind carried the scent of cypress trees and the warm earth, Clara said softly in her heart, "I have returned, not to where I was born, but to where my heart found its place." The 3 cypresses stood still, rustling in the gentle breeze. They witnessed the silent promise between Clara and Elias, watched Caleb run around with a new laugh from the pain, and witness a home truly being reborn. Not through magic, but through love, strong enough to heal. Clara and Elias' story reminds us that life, no matter what age we are, can always give us a second chance. The losses, the misunderstandings, the moments when we feel like we've been left behind, are not the end. They are just the road that prepares us to meet the right people, the right place, the right peace. The 3 most memorable things from this story are: every wound can be the beginning of something more beautiful, if we have the courage to move on. Silence is sometimes the language of hearts that have been hurt, but still want to love again. And family is not just blood. Sometimes it is the people we meet late, but are more true than what we expected. At 60 or 70, everyone has had an unspeakable pain. But this story hopefully reminds you that there are still warm days ahead, if we open our hearts just a little. Thank you for accompanying the story. If the story brings you warmth, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories that touch your heart.